So on behalf of CERC, the Christian Education Research Centre, we want to welcome everybody here for our research presentation. I always forget at the end, so I'm going to start off at the beginning by thanking Kirsty and also Leighton for being the people responsible for putting this all together. And certainly Kirsty does a lot of organisation behind the scenes, and Leighton's always has the AV going well for us. So thank you, you two guys sitting over there. And I'm not going to walk out the door at the end kicking myself because I forgot to say thank you. So let's do it at the beginning. You know, our aim in CERC is to try and do research that has an impact. And I must admit, it is a blast to be part of a project that you're seeing where you sort of have the idea, then you put it together, get the data, whatever, write the report, and then see the impact it has. And just recently, I did a keynote address for the Greater Sydney Conference. They had a think tank. They got all the principals and teachers from Adventist schools in Sydney together with all the church pastors. And our aim was, how can we get the churches and the schools working closer together? And the keynote I presented was actual fact, the research we'd done about what was it like having churches on school campuses. And that was like the foundational research that stimulated the conversation of the afternoon. And I must admit, I drove away from that thinking, how good is it to be involved in research? There are plenty of times when it's 1 in the morning and I haven't quite got something finished that has to be submitted by 9, where I'm going, why am I doing research? But so we've got to admit there, if anything, being involved in these projects has some highs and some lows. But let's celebrate the highs. So we've got two presenters today, both having done projects in Christian education. So we'd like to start off with Marion. You know, I have a fish tank down in the old education building there. I don't know what it's called these days. And Sally Ann Den was our previous secretary, and she came to me once. She said, you know what, everybody's always asking me, we should name these fish. And I said, they're not pets. We're not naming anything. And then there was this campaign to name these fish. And I had one fish, it was a copperband butterfly, a really hard fish to keep alive because they're really picky eaters. And if you can keep that thing alive for a year, you've done really well. And then one day I said to Sally Ann, okay, we'll name that fish. And she said, oh, really? What are we going to call it? And I said, we're going to call it Marion because we just don't know how long it's going to be with us. With that somewhat excellent introduction, Marion, I've enjoyed working with you over the years. Even though you tell me I look fat, I'm going to cop that on the chin. So let's start off by looking at a community of practice for university students and their professional learning. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you. Actually, I can reflect what Peter's saying. I was only just saying to Sherry before that when I was doing my exit statement at Flinders University after my first doctorate, the dean said to me, "You really like this stuff, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do. And isn't it an absolute pain that I've only discovered it at 62? What a pain. All these years I've wasted that I should have been doing this because I love it." All right, so what I'm going to share with you today is a project that Sherry ran the project and I observed, and we together worked through it. We've called it the Community of Practice for University Students Professional Learning. And it really is a story about some of our students, some of our third-year primary students. They didn't know what they were getting into when they started, and they talked to the people from the year before and were prepared for an interesting experience. Their job was to tutor at-risk students at Avondale School, and they each got one, and each week they would go up and spend time tutoring the student. These students were not seriously disabled or anything like that, but they were kids that really were struggling to keep up with their peers. And so the extra help that they got from our students was really good for them, but it was a very good experience for our students as well. And the focus of the study and the presentation I'm going to do now is really not about the reading that they did. The focus is actually about what they learned and how they learned and how they grew during that learning process. So it's really not about a reading thing per se. It's about educating students. So rationale, when we thought about it, you know, since 2005, there have actually been 12 reports or reviews into teaching of reading. It's a bit worrying, isn't it? And people are still struggling. The Short-Changed Report, don't you love that name, the Short-Changed Report? Surveyed 38 universities, and they found only 5 of the 116 literacy units actually addressed teaching early reading. That's very scary. That really is. And 70% didn't mention the 5 essential elements of effective evidence-based reading instruction. You know, that would be automatic, wouldn't it? You would think. The Next Steps report in 21 acknowledged the crunch of what we were addressing, which was that many graduates commenced teaching without the necessary competence to teach reading, including how to begin and then incrementally develop their students' reading abilities. And, you know, this isn't us saying it. This is a serious report. So we looked at addressing it. And there are possible solutions. One of them would be mentoring. That, you know, and everybody says mentoring is great. So somebody gets alongside you and mentors and encourages you, or they get alongside you and they coach you step by step as to what you can do, or they even tutor you yourself. But the problem with this is that often by default, they're only going to be learning what that person knows, and it may well not be based on data and proper research, and it's not evidence-based. It's actually more likely what that person's been doing for ages and ages and has volunteered to mentor or coach these young people. So that is a serious thing. And also these researchers found that often the students themselves were more motivated by being caring and loving and enthusiastic towards their students rather than actually data-based, careful pedagogy based on evidence-based practices. So that really made us think. We looked at some research and we decided that focusing on teaching, reflecting observed practices and caring relationships doesn't really address the issue, which is a deep understanding of the reading process and then the good pedagogy. That really wasn't addressed with those other things. And also, we needed to come up with a process that involved empirical evidence, some reflection, real thinking, evaluation, and purposefully planned teaching. So that was the goal of this project. It wasn't so much about teaching reading, it was about teaching them to learn how to teach. So I love this statement by Lee. The central goal of reflective teacher education is to develop teachers' reasoning about why they employ certain instructional strategies. Do you know what you are doing, why you are teaching the way you are teaching, and how can you improve that to benefit the students? University theory must be integrated into real-world practice. And yes, you know, we've always had university theory, and then we've said, okay, let's improve that. Let's bring in practical experience, but it still doesn't dig deep enough to really get to the core of how to teach properly. So we also looked at this statement, which I rather like. Collaborative learning takes place through processes of shared meaning making. And there is a dynamic relationship between the meanings and the individual interpretation. And through this, they verify and they negotiate their own views. That's how they learn and they reach a shared understanding. It must move beyond the mechanics of teaching to a dynamic understanding and effective practice. And that's what we were on about. Okay, so this concept of social learning, you know, you can hear echoes of Bandura there, can't you? Where the dynamics of shared meaning making in context leads to multiple benefits. These researchers found that where they worked collaboratively, beginning teachers found that their self-efficacy increased. And when those worked on their own, not in groups and collaboratively, there was no change. That's quite significant. And vigorous discussion and challenge, can challenge and stimulate thinking about why and how a particular aspect of teaching is used, particularly when guided by lecturer feedback, which can be critical. It really can, in really bringing the students up with their knowledge and their skills. So 6 specific elements. Thank you, Sherry. And we looked at these, but the focus of our research focused on those last 2. So you've got in establishing authentic relationships, maintaining expectations, drawing on a repertoire of teaching, engaging in classroom level curriculum. But the critical ones for us were these 2, reflecting on and evaluating their teaching for purposes of improvement, and then talking with other teachers about their pedagogy. So that was the goal. So the method, they met in small groups, only 4 to 6 students, only 4 to 6 students in each tutorial group, which meant that Sherry did a lot of running around doing lots and lots of tutorial groups, but that's very good for her to keep her busy. Each week, it was following their tutoring session, and they met together to do this. During this time, they debriefed. Well, yeah, of course they debriefed, but they had to tell what they had done, why they'd chosen that particular approach, and whether it had worked. And many of them came to their first ones where they sort of had to embarrassingly confess that, yeah, it didn't work. The kids played up, or the kids weren't interested, they were disengaged. And that soon brought them to the point of realizing they really had to reflect and talk about it. They explored, planned, and debated with each other and their lecturer. And the lecturer, our dear Sherry, constantly challenged them to explain why they chose that particular approach and what data was it based on. So, yeah, you're going to do that one and you think it's a really great idea. How have you come to that conclusion? On what have you based your idea? And was it successful? So the facilitator asked intentional questions. What have you learned through this reading experience? What was your highlight? What aspects would you never repeat? Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I've certainly learned from some of my mistakes. You think back over and you think, yeah, I'll never do it that way again. Boy, did I have a learning experience and it wasn't nice. But you learn from that, and these students did. And then she said to them, think about other members of your tutorial group, and after they answer the above questions, provide them with some feedback about what you have observed about their learning journey so that you're helping each other grow in this teaching experience. So it was about pulling them together to really recognize that although they were going to challenge and they were going to confront each other sometimes, at the same time, the whole goal was that they would learn together and they were there to support each other, not pull each other apart. It could have been seen that way. And for some dear, shy little petals, it was a bit confronting. But on the other hand, because there was somebody there to facilitate and moderate and keep it calm, in fact, they learned, and they learned to trust each other. Most university tutorials, I don't know if you remember yours, but they tend to be learning situations and discussion, but they tend to be fairly passive. Normally, tutorial students don't universally report to each other on their activities or open themselves for peer scrutiny, feedback, and encouragement. So that's what we were trying to do in this situation. However, the difference with this community practice approach was this: there was honest, vigorous debate. And it really was. And I sat and observed and thought to myself, oh, that would make me sit up if somebody said that to me about my teaching that I had just shared with them. It was very, very invigorating for some people. Also, questions were asked, both by Sherry and by other students. Why did you do it? Why? What were you doing it for? What did you hope to gain? What did you find were the difficulties? What worked? What didn't work? So they were learning from each other. And at the same time, each individual was having to think about what they had done and why they did it and what it was based on, not just a good idea, but in fact, it had to be based on data. It was challenging, certainly, and there were probing questions by the lecturer, but the lecturer also did a bit of moderation at times. So if things got a little bit excited, well, she could keep them all nice and calm. Nobody got really nasty that I ever observed, but at the same time, as I said, some people are probably more sensitive than others, so a little bit of moderation was most appropriate. So 5 themes emerged from them. How to engage the student, incorporating the children's interests, demonstrating their own enthusiasm. They learned this sometimes the hard way. Another theme, identifying the reading goal. I love these kids who came in without a plan. They said they had a plan, but when push came to shove and they were in the classroom, they weren't very planned at all. And they had to make the activities relevant. So some of them worked extremely hard, producing lovely activities and making them and doing a lot of effort. But then the student was completely turned off because it wasn't of any interest to them whatsoever. And that was a hard lesson to learn, but it was a relevant lesson because they had to realize that in order to engage students, make the students learn, then they really had to make it relevant. And the student had to see the benefit in doing this. Experiential learning while tutoring, learning to be flexible. This kid is suddenly turned off, doesn't want to play, doesn't want to do anything. What am I going to do? Am I going to sit here and fight with him for the rest of the session? No, I'm going to have to be adaptable and I'm going to have to change what I'm doing and come up with something different. Learning to persevere for them individually was a big thing for some of them. And then also not to compare themselves with others in their class. You know, I'm having trouble with my student. When we do our debrief, I can't report anything nice or listen to all the others. They're all saying the wonderful things they did and how successful. And they compared themselves, and it was quite, you know, for some it could be quite discouraging. And that was a lesson to learn. That in teaching, you can't just, you know, feel, oh, they don't love me and give up. You've got to persevere and you've got to adapt and be flexible and make it relevant. Planning the tutoring session, some learned the hard way about being prepared and went in not prepared, and the whole thing was an absolute shambles. And they found out very quickly the hard way. They had to critically think about the purpose. What were they doing it for? And then they realized the benefits of teacher collaboration, but it was a bit confronting for some of them. All right, the benefits. Learning to occasionally accept negative feedback. We all have to do it, don't we? And it's not always pleasant, but if you do it with an open mind, you can always grow from it. And that's what happened in the group, that when somebody made a negative statement about something they had done, then others in the group would actually say, yes, but, and join in. And so did the lecturer. And so that student actually grew and was exposed to a confronting kind of statement in a very secure, safe environment, and they grew from it. They had to understand and they had to learn. And what we found was that by the end of the session, they were so much more confident and so much more aware of their own ability and what they could do. The benefits of the verbal feedback and dialogue. This is really interesting because several lots of research have shown that actually taking initial education students and actually verbally discussing with them the problems is far more effective than if they just got a written feedback, which is sometimes the case in some places. They just get written feedback. Well, written feedback doesn't cut it in terms of really making an impression and helping that learning growth to take place. So that verbal feedback and then the dialogue with the lecturer and the other students actually really benefited the growth. They recognized the personal growth that occurred in their ability to accept challenges, and by both the lecturer and their peers to accept criticism and to learn from it in that safe group. So, final thoughts. This program, I think, was incredibly successful in both what could be observed in the ITE's learning, as well as from their own comments, and these are some of them. The most important aspect I will take away from this program is the importance of collaborating and sharing ideas with your colleagues, which for initial teacher education students is not something you would expect them to come up with in their first year. Another comment, the power in reflective practice to meet and share our strengths and challenges. They found that real power and strength in being able to do that, share my challenges, and have others point out, no, don't get so discouraged about that. What you've done there is really good. So to hear from their peers, peers they're encouraging, which is helpful. And I love this one. Group discussions really encourage growth, learning, and confidence. So, thank you. Ta-da.
What we might do, just as we're changing over to Sherry, we might just take some questions. I
Yeah,
must admit, I'll just start with a comment. Back in the day, Jenny Gore was a professor at University of Newcastle, and she came up with the quality teaching model.
Right.
And then they implemented this thing called quality teaching rounds,
Yeah.
where you ended up being a little professional network within your school, and 3 of your peers observed you teaching, and you sat down later and then discussed how it all went.
Yeah.
And the research on that in terms of professional development of teachers is just mind-blowing. Now, as I was sitting listening to Marion, I could just feel reflections of that same sort of thing happening. So I'm not surprised it was successful.
But the sad thing, I think, is that while that happened then, and we do this here, in so many places it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And kids, I shouldn't call them kids, these young people, they don't get that benefit of really having to really get into their learning. And as a result, the research is saying from all these government reports, they go out unprepared. Shut up, Marion.
No, has anybody else got a question of Marion as she's rushing off?
No, I just needed to make a statement. No student was adversely affected throughout the research, and I can assure you that it was overwhelmingly positive, and the SAEQ feedback from the students was that is the best unit they've ever been in so far. So please know that they're not traumatized by it.
Thanks, Sherry. Well, throw it over to you for our second topic.
Okay, awesome. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have online students, and for me, this has always been something, and it's like, how do you engage them? So Maria and I started questioning ourselves and going, well, we've got all these students, what can we do about it? So we looked at previous research and why research this? Well, other researchers have found that they feel disengaged and disenfranchised with their courses. Okay, online assessment processes lack personal contact with other students and lecturers. I'm sure you've all had these kind of reflections on your SAEQs. Like, I want to talk to the others, why can't I? And then also lecturers just being overwhelmed with the workload and the increase in online teaching and assessment. So this kind of drove us into looking at this and seeing, well, how can we improve this in our own specific units? So, how do you engage them? We needed to see what previous literature said on this. And I've put some of this, but some of this you'll notice it's sitting in 2025. And you'll notice we actually did a systematic literature review this 2023. So I've just put some of these in there to pique you and just to make you think about things, but assessment tasks that include aspects of human presence, individual choice and personal experience or background. And I'm going to come back to that statement. Authentic online assessments are ones where learners make prior knowledge connections linked through practical or practicality, real life application and meaningfulness, assessments that offer learners a context for their creativity and productivity, an assessment that provides a good base for sustained learning. Okay. The last group advocate that students need to question themselves as they're doing things. So keep that in your mind as we progress through. So when we sat down, Maria and I were talking about it, and we're like, okay, so if we're going to do this research project, we need to think about, well, what is known, okay, on this topic, what was being implemented, and how could we enhance it? Because clearly, if you're going to do a research project, that you need some outcomes coming out of this. And if this is an area of concern, particularly for us with online students, so we engaged on the great thing of doing an action research. Thought, well, if we're going to do insider action research, it's because we need to look what's there. But as we're doing things, if there's things that we need to change, we need to be able to do it then and there. We can't wait to get to the end of the project and then implement change. And so that's why we chose this form of methodology. So to start off with, And I'll tell you, I called it a journey, if you remember the title of this front, because it is an honest journey along. We've just submitted a paper, and in this paper, it's on this of what I'm talking about now. We've used all these road and traveling analogies. And we have said, you know, for the action research, it's pretty much getting in the car, putting your safety belt on, because it's a rough road when you're doing action research, because you are sometimes moving forward, moving backwards, reflecting, you're going both directions at the same time as you're doing it. So it is one of those really interesting methodologies to work in. So we started off and we thought, look, we'll do a systematic literature review. Great place to start. Neither of us had ever done one, but we engaged in it. And we found something. What terminology do you use to investigate this? Like, everybody was using terms all over the place and nothing made sense. So, you know, we started using certain terms and it wasn't working. We actually came and got the library staff to help us to look into what other terminology we could put in, because we started off and we thought, you know, it's going to be humanization. Well, not many other people are using that terminology. So, you know, then we started finding things, and throughout this, we actually found out that there were terms, but they were using them interchangeably. So we published our systematic literature review, and from that, we discovered that there are 3 terms that can be used, but other researchers were not using them consistently, and some were overlapping and everything. So by doing the systematic literature review, we actually pulled out the theory of it, and we were able to define each of those. So we contributed to the theory by giving definitions for each one. Then we had all this information. We've got these definitions. We've got these 29 articles that we found with all this information. How do we find out more about using this information? And as we looked at it more, we found that across the assessment design process, which means from when you start the assessment, even before the students enroll, setting it all up and everything, and then getting the students involved in it, and then marking it, and then giving them the feedback, is called the assessment design process. So across that, you actually have places or times where you do things. And so there's actually a pre-assessment time before the students get the assessment. You do a whole lot of things to set it all up. And then when you've given the assessment to the students, that's called the at-assessment time. So we've coined these phrases, by the way. And during that time, there are things that you do that include the humanizing, personalizing, and individualizing. And then post-assessment, when you give the assessment back again, you also have elements of humanizing, individualizing, and personalizing. So we came up with the HIP: humanizing, individualizing, and personalizing. So when I talk about the HIP components, those are the elements across the assessment design. So now we've got all this information, and we've got a research where we're going to go and have a look at things, and we're like, well, we've got all this information. How do we share this before we start? You know, we need to make whoever our participants are aware of all this information. How do we do it? So, you know how I said it's an action research? We went in and we found some information around professional development. And Corsage et al. Says that if you're doing professional development, you need to map a timeline. You need to quantify the time engagement that whoever's doing this professional development is going, what's their commitment to it. You need to list the activities, and you need to have relevance with support. We thought, that's great, we can do that. We've got all this information, we've got all these suggestions, and we've got all these examples from this literature that we've done. And we went, well, how do we get to use that? And honestly, the whole way through this process, it's around tool development. So tool development was, we came up with a PD booklet. And in this booklet, okay, it actually, you can see, I've got the example of it here. We've actually outlined what the project was. Then we outlined reflective questions, because you need to know what you're currently doing in your unit around this. And then a list of ideas of what aspects are humanizing, what aspects are individualizing, and what aspects are personalizing, and where can you do those across the assessment design process. So we developed this. We actually got feedback from our participants. So I'm not going to talk about the study in that aspect, but today I'm just sharing with you how we developed tools of theory as we went along. So our first development was this PD booklet. Now we had all this information. We thought, okay, we did the PD with the participants. And then we thought, okay, well, they gave us feedback, which was great and everything. Now we've asked them questions in there, but how do we record what they're doing in their classes? So we came up with a questionnaire, as you do in research. We thought, well, how do you map that? And how do they, so if they've done a questionnaire, how do they map it out? And so we thought, not a problem. We get the results from the questionnaire and we'll just, code them out. Is it a humanizing, is it individualizing, or a personalizing element? And where is it in the assessment hub? The assessment process design. And so the questionnaire, look, it had 12 questions around it. That's how it was divided up. So Maria and I took the results and we started, each coding it. And we sat down with the first one and our coding did not match. And we're like, ooh, we've even come up with the definitions of these elements. How could we not code the same? What we discovered is we needed a cheat sheet. So we came up with a cheat sheet. The cheat sheet actually is only one page and it has all what exactly is humanizing, what exactly is individualizing, and what exactly is personalizing in layman's terms, as into fitting in with the exact examples. So that was the next tool that we developed as part of the theory of what we were going along. Once we did that, we went off and we did the second questionnaire each on our own, came back, exact match. So we did 2 more. We thought maybe that was just, beginner's luck. Went off and did 2 more, exact match. We went and finished off all the rest of the participant questionnaires that we had, and it was an exact match all the way through. So we were sure that our cheat sheet was working well. Then we thought, okay, we've got all of this. We know what's humanizing and individualizing. How do we show it as a representation? Because as a lecturer, I want to see across my assessment design, where am I implementing these elements and how can I make it look? So we kind of needed to design something that could overlay, and we came up with all sorts. We tried spreadsheets, we tried all sorts of other things, and then we came up with the assessment process matrix. And what it is we've got when it is in the assessment design process, so we've got the pre, at, and post, and then we've got each of the HIP elements across, and taking the data from the questionnaire and putting it in so you can expand it and add lines. And we use the color because we stop the color for humanization in the pre thing to stop it. And you can see how many other things. So when we did that and we put in the data from our participants, it was a beautiful visual. You could just look at it and you go, oh my goodness. So for my one, I did it with one of my units, and the thing that just jumped out at me, there's no right or wrong, by the way. It's just looking to see which elements you've got where. Mine was in the post assessment. When I looked, I had, individualization as part of the feedback. I had personalization, no problem, but there was nothing in the humanization. I'm like, what could I do? And it was as simple as just adding, a audio recording in the feedback back saying, you did these elements really well. I liked seeing this and that kind of thing, and just engaging in with the student. And the feedback I got from the students was, it was great, because in the audio, I said to them what they did well and how they could have improved. And they're like, I love that. I was like, wow, that's really forward fed into what I'm doing. So there was a great element in that space. Then our next steps on this project, we just submitted this as a publication. So we were waiting to hear back from the journal around our tool development. But at the moment, we're looking at, we've got 2 more publications to work out from this project. We'll be looking at the results from our participants, but there's 2 sections for us to do in that. So there's 2 more papers. But the other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be developing an online PD for lecturers around using the tools and being able to analyze and look at their own units. So I will let you know when that comes out, and hopefully we'll have it up on Canvas through our learning portal so that you guys can engage in that and utilize our tools that we've developed. So I'm very excited about that. We're looking to market it as well. So it's one of those outcomes for Avondale where they could do it for other lecturers from other universities. So, yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions? Yes.
Did you say that the concept that you've developed is currently submitted? So it hasn't been, we're waiting on it.
So the systematic literature review with the definitions already published.
Okay.
Okay, so the definitions are already available. So we're not waiting for those to come through, but we are still getting our tools, whatever we need to do with it. I don't know if we have to copyright them or anything like that. So yeah, Rob,
Thanks for the presentation.
you're welcome.
All right, confessing myself to be selfish, I'm teaching distance education this time year, right?
It is.
So I came here thinking these people have got a simple solution they're going to give me to solve my problem. And I'm not quite, obviously I need to personalise it a bit, do all of those things, but I don't feel a magic bullet. I guess you can find one.
Oh, we have ideas around things, but it's you looking at what are the needs of your unit. Okay. I think a lot of it will become a lot more apparent when you do the PD. Okay. So, and I'm happy to share the booklet, but please don't share it beyond Avondale because we haven't copyrighted it yet. Okay, so I'm more than happy to share that. Okay.
Terry, I've got a question just about what I found. I don't do as much undergraduate teaching anymore, but back in the day when I was doing it, the whole thing, you had students online and students sort of face to face, but it really, through Moodle and just the way it all worked, it all just morphed into one big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so other strategies talk about, they could be applied to the students that are actually sitting in the classroom as they're receiving their assessment feedback and that sort of thing as well, couldn't
Yes,
they? It's
yes.
not just distant students.
No, it's for anybody. So it's, for example, all the things pre your assessment. What are you doing? Are you doing a video introducing the assessment? There's your humanizing. Okay. Or it might be an audio recording talking it through. For individualization, you might be giving them choice. Okay. So instead of you can only answer this one question, there might be 3 different questions, pick one. Okay. Then you're individualizing. Personalizing is where you start getting them to reflect and bring something from their background into it. So, you know, in your question, have you started and are you helping them through that? Or it might be go and talk to this person who's already in the field and then bring that in. So you're actually getting them involved, or they can choose which individual they connect with, which then goes back to the individualization. So we are doing those elements through. It's looking at how you're doing it. And then once the students have the task, what elements of humanizing, individualizing, and personalizing. And there's no right or wrong. And in the booklet, there are a whole lot of examples of ways of doing it. And I found the examples, so we pulled from the literature, but we also got examples from our colleagues of things that they were doing. And we put it in there so that you can come to things and it shows, you know, these examples and which one do they link to, so that you know, well, if I utilize that, it links to individualization. If I do something like that, it links to personalization. So, okay. So, Rob, unfortunately, there is no magic bullet, but it does engage your students more. So if you go back and have a look at those, I'll take you back to them. That slide where I showed you around the, I think it was the second one on there. That is really what's coming through from the literature about engaging your students. Okay, is really getting them to think and reflect. Okay, sorry, there was another hand. Daniel.
Thank you so much. I was reflecting on the audio feedback that you said you gave your students, and it was interesting hearing you talk about, you know, you would say to them what they did really well, what they could, what they could improve on. I think the immediate reaction for me, maybe I was supposed to think, oh, I do that feedback anyway.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's the medium rather than the message that's the important.
Yeah.
All right.
And I don't know if you remember on Moodle, I haven't checked out Canvas, but Moodle only gave you a 2-minute recording for audio feedback, which was great. I thought, I'm never going to make it. Honestly, I'd run out of time. So you're really being quite succinct in what it's almost like students process it in a different way. So it's giving them the options of which way they want to process it. It's that whole thing of student engagement. And they actually started listening to all my feedback.
I think as well it links in with what Marion was saying earlier about the importance of students receiving verbal feedback from their mentors. That there's something about that human interaction that, for whatever reason, is more impactful to sticks with students.
Yeah. I was very worried about my audio feedback. I thought, am I going to be, like, you should have done da 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 da. Okay. I first turned away, said all of what I needed to, and then came back and did the lovely recording. Okay. Because, sometimes you mark something and you think, what were you thinking? You don't record that. Okay. Just stayed in your recording. It would have been good if you had included, so I did all of that first. Confession. Any other questions? Yep.
Well, we're 9 minutes to, and our aim is to finish at 10 to it. So thank you very much, Sherry. What up? Yes, thank you very much. It's time we return the light back to students. But thank you very much for coming. We obviously have another presentation in second semester, so we'll all look forward to that. But on your way out, there's still some nibbles over there, so feel free to fill up a plate, and we'll see you all next time.